Slowbro just got a massive buff, but is it enough to make it useful? Are people going to start using Slowbro or Slowking? Welcome back to another Pokemon Sleep video. It's Bro Vinny here. Today we are talking about the 2 news updates that we received in the last 2 days. Let's go through the quick one first. Response to inappropriate conduct. Don't worry, I don't think this one is targeted at any of the time travelers. Not that the developers haven't said before that they would punish people who actually time travel. However, what they did reference is using an unauthorized tool or program, and changing time zone is not that. Otherwise, people who go on flights or travel to work that is in a different time zone are going to be in a lot of trouble. Using unauthorized tools or programs to conduct a considerable number of sleep research sessions. I'm not going to show you the evidence of this because I'm not actually 100% sure which people or which group of people the developers are talking about, but apparently, and this is word on the street, word on the street, there are some people who are able to hack the game in a way where they are basically just always at Master 20 and doing crazy strong sleep research in the morning, and from a week to week basis the Snorlax strength is not resetting, so they're doing some crazy stuff. And I mean, true to the name, hacking. So not like playing around with the time zone. However, the developers have said that we shouldn't promote playing the game in ways other than intended. To be fair, changing time zone is an intended feature of the game, just not the way that some of us choose to do it. But regardless, the developers have added an update where we can no longer cook dinner from your Sunday on Monday. In fact, if we now go to the other update, maintenance and version 1.5.0, which is what we're actually focusing on today, you'll see that the developers will no longer allow dinner to be cooked at 4 AM. So if you normally wake up at 4 AM and you've gotten used to cooking dinner at 4 AM, that's just not going to work anymore. You are going to cook breakfast at 4 AM. Whether the other bugs that allow you to cook Sunday dinner on Monday are going to change, that we don't know until the update actually comes. With this update, we'll also get the choice to put shiny Pokemon as our profile picture, which is great news for a lot of people who have been asking for this for months already. Previously, if you caught a shiny Pokemon, you still couldn't use the shiny icon as your profile picture. So it's just another way to flex the shinies that you got. Now onto the part that we're most interested about, the meta shifting once again. First and foremost, when I say the meta is shifting, even if Slowpoke tails are not farmed effectively enough to be used to cook dishes from a day-to-day basis, if you farm your Slowpoke tails the week before an event and dump all of those Slowpoke tails as extra ingredients on your strongest dish, maybe macarons or maybe green grass salad, then you're going to get a huge boost to the new week in the event. So being able to farm them more effectively is still going to help you for powering up your events. Which is why we're extremely curious about this point here, Slowbro getting ingredient finding 30% higher than it currently is. Now, it isn't an ingredient specialist to begin with, but it is the only Pokemon that can farm Slowpoke tails at level 30, besides Slowpoke and Slowking, which obviously are in the same evolutionary line. So both Slowbro and Slowking are getting an increase in their carry limit, which, as we know by now, is a good thing for skills specialists because skills cannot trigger once your carry limit is reached. It's also a good thing if you farm a lot of ingredients because once carry limit is reached, your Pokemon will only farm berries. What is interesting though is that only Slowbro is getting that 30% buff for ingredient finding, whereas Slowking is getting that 10% buff. Slowking, on the other hand, is getting another buff. It is getting a skill buff. So the chance for skill trigger has increased by 10%. But what does that actually mean? Does that mean that Slowking or Slowbro is good now? Should we use it? And what should we use each of them for? The short answer is Slowbro. If you have a really good Slowpoke that is ingredient focused, so it has ingredient up. And I was just scrolling through my Discord and I found this one. So this is not mine, but somebody has ingredient finding S, M, and ingredient finding up. That's a lot of ingredient up. this is a really good ingredient focused Slowpoke. So if you've got an ingredient focused Slowpoke, it should become a Slowbro. Whereas if you have a skill focused Slowpoke, then you should evolve it into Slowking. Whereas before this update, Slowking was superior in every aspect because Slowking is just faster and has a little higher inventory. But otherwise, their ingredient drop rate and also the skill trigger rate per production were exactly the same. So the key difference is that Slowking is getting a skill buff, Slowbro is getting a better ingredient buff. But Slowking is still decent and it's also getting ingredient buff, just not as big. Now you might ask, well, Energizing Cheer, which is what Slowbro and Slowking line does for their skill trigger, isn't really that good anyway. I mean, we've been through this before. We talked about Leafeon versus Sylveon in our evolutions guide. Well, something else is changing. If you scroll down a little bit further, there is now an adjustment for the Energizing Cheer skill where it's more likely to trigger on Pokemon that has the lowest energy. Unfortunately, we don't know how likely that's going to be the case. If it were guaranteed to trigger on the lowest energy Pokemon, then this could be a very useful skill. Because sometimes it's not like your entire team are depleting in energy at the same rate. Because sometimes you could be running a Victory Bell that is self-healing, or you could be running a Tyranitar that is self-healing. So if you can bring an Energizing Cheer Pokemon that guarantees the heal on something that isn't self-healing like Typhlosion, then you're winning. And even if the entire team didn't have self-healing skills, some Pokemon may have energy recovery up, some may have recovery down. So having this perk on Energizing Cheer is actually going to buff this skill quite a lot more than what it was doing before. The only problem is we don't know how likely that's going to be the case. If it's only like a 1% chance increase for it to trigger on the lowest energy Pokemon, it's still not worth using. So regarding Slowking's skill trigger analysis, we're just going to have to wait to know more about how this works. But what we can extrapolate from the information provided is the rate of Slowpoke tail farming. Now, just so everyone's on the same page, we're going to go through what the current situation for Slowbro and Slowking are. Slowking is generally faster with a lower frequency than Slowbro. It does require a King's Rock to evolve, so it is more costly, but otherwise it makes sense that it would cost more to evolve into something that's better. They actually have the same skill trigger rate per production, but because of the faster speed, you'll find that Slowking will trigger more in a day than Slowbro. The chance for an ingredient to drop is very low. Generally speaking, the average rate is about 20% for most Pokemon, but for Slowbro, its ingredient drop rate per production is 15%, and it's the same for Slowking. After the update, this is going to split. Slowbro is going to get a 30% improvement on its ingredient rate, whereas Slowking will get a 10% improvement. However, Slowking originally farms more Slowpoke tails than Slowbro, and that's because, once again, it has a faster speed. So what does that actually mean? Let's give Slowbro 30% more tails. So currently it farms 3.7 tails in a day based on whatever settings I've got on. So 3.72 times 1.3 is 4.8 tails. So Slowbro, under the new update, without any stats, just to keep the calculation simple, is going to farm 4.8 tails per day. Whereas Slowking starts with 4.1 tails and gets a 10% boost, so times 1.1. It's going to farm 4.5 tails in a day, which means Slowbro is going to win out, but only ever so slightly. After the update, Slowbro is going to farm about 7% more Slowpoke tails than Slowking without any other buffs in its stat. Now I should remind everyone that ingredient rate being higher also means that berries will go down. So it's not a win-win situation. Having ingredient rate up is good when you actually need the ingredients, but it doesn't necessarily always mean that the strength is going to go up. In Slowpoke Line's situation, it does because Slowpoke tails are just that strong. Now let's give ingredient finder to Slowbro and see how many tails a Slowbro can farm in a day. Even if we look at giving ideal ingredient stats to Slowbro, so let's say we give it ingredient finder M, helping bonus, helping speed, and then in the calculator I'm going to add 4 helping bonus team members so that the helping bonus is counted as a 25%. This is under production comparison. Slowbro will farm 8.5 tails in a day in the current situation. After the update, 8.65 times 1.3 gives you 11.2 tails in a day. Under similar situation, if we give a 10% boost on Slowking's 9.57 Slowpoke tails, it will get 10.5 tails in a day, which is again less than Slowbro. So in my opinion, it doesn't seem like a big enough difference for you to worry if you already invested a ingredient focused Slowpoke and evolved it into a Slowking. And don't forget that Slowking to begin with has the highest total skill trigger per day, so it's also getting a buff in that department, Slowking being the current best energizing cheer Pokemon to begin with. That's a really nice buff. And by that I mean, if you look at the energizing cheer Pokemon and I filter for only the final evolutions, you'll see that in terms of expected amount of skill triggers per day, Slowking is at the top, followed by Leafeon and then Slowbro. So even if you feel like energizing cheer is going to be a very useful skill, Slowking would then still be the superior choice. Now wait a minute, slow down there, bro Vinny. Even though Slowbro is farming a bit more tails than before, does it beat the current alternatives to farming Slowpoke tails? There are 2 other ways of farming Slowpoke tails. One is with Ingredient Magnet, and we just talked about Vaporeon being at the top of the game. And the other is with Ditto, but unfortunately level 60 is still not unlocked yet. However, we can still make comparisons between Slowbro's tail farming ability and Ditto's tail farming ability, and the result might surprise you. Slowbro, being not an ingredient specialist, only drops 1 tail at level 30 and 2 tails at level 60, whereas Ditto is an ingredient specialist, but it only has tail at level 60. And the way we're going to make this comparison is, well, first of all, give them ingredient stats. So ingredient finding up, helping bonus, helping speed. Then clicking this button on the calculator, forcing it to calculate at level 60, which is currently not available, but the calculator still tries its best to give us the level 60 stats. So there may be some inaccuracies when we go beyond the current known maximum. Now, before we look at how many tails they each farm, we've got to look at, well, there's a slight unfair advantage for Slowbro, because in production comparison here, it will heal itself. So by healing itself, it's going to farm quicker than Ditto, who cannot heal, besides the long sleep. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give both Pokemon maximum healing all day. I'm just going to assume that you guys all know how to manage your energy levels very well, and then focus only on how many tails each Pokemon will farm. Now, at the current situation before the buff, Slowbro farms 17 tails with nearly perfect stats. Ditto, on the other hand, farms 24 tails. If we times Slowbro's tails by 1.3, we get 22.6 tails, which is very close to Ditto's tail farming. Of course, we can't ignore the fact that Ditto will do all these other ingredients and will add ingredient strength in other ways, but also we can't ignore the fact that Slowbro can do healing. But if we were to put all these other factors aside, Slowbro does pretty good for Slowpoke tails, with Ditto being only about 5% better. And the reason for that, before you jump to the conclusion that, well, why is Ditto so bad? Well, the reason is Ditto cannot have tails at level 30. If Ditto could have tails at level 30, this wouldn't even be comparable. Ditto would just win hands down. But for now, if you've got an ingredient finding Slowpoke, you should make it as Slowbro. It does a pretty decent amount of tails. Just make sure its ingredient list is double tails. So in conclusion, Slowbro is better than Slowking in farming Slowpoke tails. Slowbro is almost as good as Ditto at farming Slowpoke tails once level 60 is reached. But there's one more character we haven't considered yet, and it is Vaporeon, and we just did a whole video on Vaporeon. Vaporeon being an ingredient magnet specialist, and the best at it in fact, has a chance to drop Slowpoke tails as long as you have it unlocked. And by unlocked, I mean somebody, like Slowpoke for example, has to have dropped a Slowpoke tail at least once during your gameplay, and you've collected that tail and it appears in the notes of your game's menu. Then Vaporeon's ingredient magnet has a chance to drop that ingredient. But if you've got every single ingredient currently available unlocked, then the chance of dropping tails is only 1 in 16. Once again, we're going to ignore all the other perks of running a Vaporeon and just focus on tails. Will it beat the new and improved Slowbro? We're going to give Vaporeon a skill focus because that's where we're going to get the Slowpoke tails. We're going to compare level 50. We're going to compare them at level 50. We don't want to use level 60 because there's a chance that the calculator may be inaccurate. And once again, I'm going to assume that you know how to manage your energy very well. We're going to assume that everyone's at max energy, farming at maximum rate all day. I'm also going to assume that you've seeded that Vaporeon to level 6 main skill, so as high potential as possible. And once again, if you collect every production of Vaporeon, so you're logging in frequently, which is a requirement for most skill specialists to be good, it will trigger 7.6 times in a day. At level 6 main skill, 7.62 times 21 ingredients is 160 ingredients, but only 1 in 16 of those are tails. So if we divide 160 by 16, we get 10 tails in a day, which by the way is what this number is. This 10 number just means this skill trigger times how many ingredients drop per trigger, then divide by 16 because there are 16 different types of ingredients. So that's why it says each ingredient drops 10. So we could have just used this number, but that's how they arrive at this number. And if you remember from my last video, I mentioned that the average strength of all ingredients added together is 136.7, then that times 10 is 1367. So what this number is saying is the strength on average that you get from Vaporeon per ingredient type. But there are 16 ingredient types, so you times 16 again, which will arrive at this number here. But we're not looking at ingredient strength today, and currently the calculator is still bugged. It doesn't account for critical chance and it doesn't account for recipe bonus in this area. It does account for it in this area, but the ingredient count is still correct. So what we're comparing now is 8.68 to 10 tails per day. Now don't forget that this is before the update. With these stats, Slowbro is a bit worse than Vaporeon in farming tails. After the update, 8.68 times 1.3 is 11.28 tails per day. In other words, if we ignore the other 15 ingredients that Vaporeon also gives, which is a great thing, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, if we focus only on tails, Slowbro wins after the update. And this doesn't include the fact that at level 60, it will then drop 2 times the tail. So now, if we do a hypothetical level 60 situation, just like we did with Ditto, and of course maybe by level 60, Vaporeon might have another skill level up unlocked, so maybe we'll have level 7 main skill, but let's assume that we don't get level 7 main skill, we get level 6 main skill. Vaporeon still only farms about 10 tails per day, whereas Slowbro now farms 17, but that's again before the update. So after the update, it now farms 22.6, which is twice as much as Vaporeon. So we have currently a clear winner. Without level 60, Slowbro is the clear winner of farming tails. Once level 60 does come along though, Slowbro is going to be slightly worse than Ditto. What? Here's the catch. The difference is so small. If any of the stats in your Ditto were not perfect, were a little bit worse than Slowpoke, Slowbro is still going to win. So what I mean by that is, because Slowpoke is a common Pokemon, you're going to be able to catch it a lot and get better stats than Ditto. which is a rarer Pokemon and costs a lot to catch. So the chance of you rolling a Ditto with these stats is much lower. Slowpoke, under most circumstances, would still win compared to Ditto, because the chance of you getting stats that are better than Slowbro stats on Ditto is just not that high. So if you're not looking to spend a century before finishing this game, you actually should invest Slowbro as your main Tails farmer. It doesn't hurt to have a backup Ditto Tails farmer eventually though. So that was the most important bit of information from this update. The following bits of information are not quite as important, but it's nice to see that some Pokemon are getting buffs as well. Sudowoodo. Let's talk about Sudowoodo. There's really nothing to say here, but I'm going to talk about it anyway because it's getting a buff. This buff feels like something they're doing so that the people who invested their main skill seeds in Sudowoodo early on, myself included, I put a main skill seed on Sudowoodo. I think it might have been by accident. I don't remember anymore, but I did. And it's to make those people feel, well, less shafted. The most important take home point here is still don't invest in a Sudowoodo. Having said that, this is what the buff does to Sudowoodo. Let's compare it to the current best charge strength M Pokemon, which is Ampharos. Don't forget that also Ampharos can evolve twice, therefore you need less main skill seeds for it to reach level 7, whereas Sudowoodo can only evolve once, so you're going to need more main skill seeds for it to reach level 7 main skill. In the current situation, Ampharos triggers about a half a time more per day compared to Sudowoodo with best stats and best healing, in total giving 38,700 total skill strength. Sudowoodo only gets about 34,000 in strength from its skill alone. If we buff Sudowoodo with a 10% increase in its main skill trigger rate, which is just this number here, 33,900 times 1.1, we get 37,000 in total skill strength in a day, which is still less than Ampharos, and Sudowoodo is going to cost you more main seeds for the same result. So it's still recommended to focus on Ampharos. But does that mean that Sudowoodo is really close now? If you did invest all your main seeds early on in Sudowoodo, that it actually almost is virtually the same as an Ampharos? Unfortunately, Sudowoodo is still worse overall because its slow speed also affects berry and ingredient farming. So without looking at any recipe requirements, of course if you need tomatoes, then Sudowoodo might be actually better. But if we didn't look at recipe bonuses and only looked at base strength, then Ampharos is the clear winner. It produces more berry strength compared to Sudowoodo, it produces more ingredient strength compared to Sudowoodo, and even after the buff it produces more skill strength compared to Sudowoodo, although only marginally. And yes, Sudowoodo is also getting an ingredient finder rate up from this update, but don't forget that where you get ingredient finding up, you're going to get less berries as a result as well. So overall, it doesn't work out to be too much better anyway. The +6 carry limit increase for Sudowoodo is also a nice thing, but still not quite reaching Ampharos' level. And lastly, Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon are getting a buff again. Essentially, if you run Swalot or Sableye, you're going to get 15% more Dream Shards than you did before from its skill. But again, don't forget that if you run a Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon, generally that means your Snorlax strength will have to go down for that week. And if you go down in your Snorlax strength, well, that also means less strength tiers reached, and each time you reach a new tier like Master 1, Master 2, you get Dream Shards. But also, your sleep research spawns will have lower sleep stars, like 1 star as opposed to 4 stars, again meaning that you're going to get less Dream Shards. So you have to look at whether that trade-off is worth it. And also slowing your progression. So if you're still looking at unlocking sleep style decks, by reducing your Snorlax's strength because you're running a Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon, your progression in the game will slow down. You're not going to unlock higher area bonuses, you're not going to unlock new islands. So ultimately it's a big trade-off in order to run these Pokemon. If you find that you've got heaps of Dream Clusters lying around, well, Dream Shard is not your bottleneck resource. Maybe it's candy, maybe it's biscuits. The resource that is your bottleneck should be the one that you should focus on farming. If you do have a bottleneck on Dream Shard, that usually means you've got very widespread investments. By leveling up multiple Pokemon at the same time when you don't actually need them, you're spending more Dream Shards compared to somebody who's only leveling up and evolving when they actually need them. It's a good thing that Sableye is also getting 10% buff to its ingredient finding, because Sableye does do mushrooms, and that's a nice thing to have. In fact, its ingredient drop rate is a bit better than Gengar. But Gengar drops 4 mushrooms, whereas Sableye drops 2 mushrooms. It's still an improvement though, and having more ways to farm mushrooms is a good thing. Especially for people like me, who have made wrong investments in their Ghastly very early on. Having said that, if you're running a Sableye, you're gonna need 5 to 6 main seeds because it doesn't have evolution. In order to make Dream Shard Magnet actually drop a significant amount of Dream Shards. Just like any skill specialist, if you don't level up that main skill to as high a level as possible, you're not really going to see the returns. But to me, it's just so silly to trade your most limited resource, your main skill seed, for Dream Shard, for your most abundant resource, which is Dream Shards. Now, if you asked me, at what point would it actually be worth running a Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon? Does it have to be 500 times more Dream Shards? Or does it only need to be 2 times more Dream Shards for it to be worth running a Dream Shard Pokemon? Unfortunately, it's actually like comparing apples and oranges. It's very hard to compare something that is used to progress your gameplay to something that is actually strong for the gameplay right now. My only recommendation is to use it when you really do need those Dream Shards. Don't use it if you're not short on them. Don't use a Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon if you're not actually short on Dream Shards. You're just wasting away that Snorlax strength. But if you do decide to run a Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon between Sableye and Swalot, go for Swalot because Swalot has a better total skill triggers in a day. Lucario is even higher, but they do different skills. One is a set number of Dream Shards, the other is a range. And to my knowledge, they don't average out the same. The one that has the variable rate should on average give you more Dream Shards than the one that has the set rate, which means Swalot might still be better. The research on this is still ongoing. I'm still looking at stats from my Discord, so don't take my word for it for this last point. For the next video, we're going to look at the Flower Festival bundles, so make sure you like and subscribe and turn your notifications on if you want to find out whether the Flower Festival bundles are any good. Slowking in farming Ditto Tails, Slowpoke Tails,